Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily, Kyle Rittenhouse speaks out for the first time since his acquittal.
This case has nothing to do with race. It never had anything to do with race. It had to do with the right to self-defense.
And closing arguments in the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial.
3-on-1, 2 pickup trucks, 2 guns, unarmed. Mr. Arbery was unarmed.
You do have the right to perform a citizen's arrest. You do have the right to have a firearm when you make an arrest.
We take you inside the courtroom to hear from both sides. Plus, the largest settlement in Colorado history. The family of Elijah McClain reaches an agreement with the city of Aurora. And later,
the vehicle struck more than 20 individuals. Some of the individuals were children, and there were some fatalities as a result of this incident.
Piecing together what went wrong after an SUV rams into a holiday parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. Days after a jury in Kenosha, Wisconsin acquitted him on all counts, Kyle Rittenhouse is speaking about the verdict. Kyle Rittenhouse granted his first interview after the trial to Tucker Carlson of Fox News. As it turns out, a film crew for Carlson has been with Rittenhouse throughout the entire trial. Rittenhouse cried and collapsed when those 5 not guilty verdicts were read last Friday. He was found not guilty of crimes in the death of Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber, and the wounding of Gage Grosskreutz. The case divided the nation, some seeing it as an attack on the Second Amendment, others seeing it as an attack on protesters and the Black Lives Matter movement. This is what Rittenhouse told Fox News.
This case has nothing to do with race. It never had anything to do with race. It had to do with the right to self-defense.
Right.
I'm not a racist person. I support the BLM movement. I support peacefully demonstrating. And I believe there needs to be change. I believe there's a lot of prosecutorial misconduct, not just in my case, but in other cases. And it's just amazing to see how much a prosecutor can take advantage of somebody.
Much of that night in August 2020 was caught on video and used in the trial. Some of it came from independent journalists who either attended or testified at trial.
It was a very tense night. As everybody knows, it was the 3rd night of riots in the city. It was a weird juxtaposition because you had peaceful protests during the day, going into the late afternoon, and then as night fell, you started to see more clashes with police, and then ultimately there was various different things going on, looting, fire set, gunshots going off, things like that. So, I mean, the setting even prior to the shooting was already quite tense, and it was very volatile.
It's been an emotional 3 weeks for me. A lot of the footage I used was used in the trial, and I sat through it and I took the witness stand. And there was, after the event happened last year, I would have to say there was 5-6 months I went to bed trying to think about different conversations I could have had that might have prevented anyone from being hurt or dying. There's a little bit of that weight kind of lifted off my shoulders with the not guilty verdict.
The families of those killed by Kyle Rittenhouse were upset by the verdicts. Anthony Huber's parents issued a lengthy statement saying the verdict means there is no accountability for the person who murdered their son. They are suing the city of Kenosha, as is Gage Grosskreutz, who was wounded that night. We're joined now by co-host Terry Austin and Los Angeles County Deputy Public Defender Philip Dubé. Philip, with a documentary telling what happened behind the scenes of this trial, could the raw footage be subpoenaed for this civil lawsuit?
Oh, of course. You can subpoena anything, but a judge will have to make a judicial determination as to whether or not the party seeking the materials is entitled to it. And it will require a balancing approach of the need to present either a plaintiff's case or a defense case against the journalist or reporter's rights under the shield law for that jurisdiction. Every jurisdiction has special protection for reporters and journalists, and the court's going to have to engage in a balancing to see if the journalist's rights would be prejudiced in any way against those of the parties to the litigation.
All right, so Terry, maybe they do get the video, maybe they don't, based on what Philip was telling us, but now that Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted of all the charges, how will this affect that civil lawsuit?
You know, technically, Brian, the criminal case should have nothing to do with the civil case, but in reality, it often does. Jurors might infer that because there's no criminal liability, there's no civil liability. But we saw in the O.J. Simpson case that he was found not guilty in his criminal case, And yet they did find that he was liable in the civil case. And one of the reasons for that is because obviously there are different standards of proof. The standard of proof in a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard of proof in a civil case is a preponderance of the evidence. So those different standards mean that it might be a different outcome. And so hopefully here the jury will listen to the evidence that's put before them and make their decision just on that evidence.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Of course, like you said, different standards. So we'll see how that city of Wisconsin or Kenosha, civil case will continue now that Rittenhouse has been acquitted. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, more news out of Wisconsin, where 5 are dead and dozens more injured after an SUV barreled into a holiday parade. But first, a monumental settlement reached for the family of Elijah McClain. After the break, we'll tell you how much the city of Aurora, Colorado will soon pay up. All that and more after this. It was the video that shocked the nation. An unarmed black jogger, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, gunned down in broad daylight. The 3 men charged will now stand trial. For live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial, subscribe to Law and Crime on YouTube TV today. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. $15 million. That's the settlement agreement reached between the family of Elijah McClain and the city of Aurora, Colorado. The settlement came in response to a federal civil rights lawsuit following McClain's death back in August of 2019. A 911 caller reported McClain for looking, quote, sketchy as he walked home wearing a ski mask. McClain suffered from anemia and was wearing the ski mask because he was cold. Officers arrived and restrained McClain, who told them he couldn't breathe. When paramedics arrived, he was injected with ketamine and went into cardiac arrest. He died in the hospital 3 days later. 3 police officers and 2 paramedics were later indicted on manslaughter and criminal negligent homicide charges. Hearing dates in that case had not yet been scheduled. As for the McClain civil lawsuit, the $15 million settlement marks the largest in Colorado history. Let's bring back Los Angeles public defender Philip Dupé and co-host Terry Austin to discuss this landmark civil lawsuit. Terry, we've heard many successful civil rights lawsuits. How do you compare this amount and the win to others?
Well, let's start off with no amount of money is going to bring Elijah McClain back or any of the other individuals who have been killed. Each case is very different, though, Brian. Elijah McClain's settlement for the $15 million seems reasonable to me. He was just walking down the street. He wasn't committing a crime. But when you compare it to the others, I think it's also in line. We know that Breonna Taylor's settlement was $12 million, and that too was a case where she had nothing to do with what was going on. They mistakenly entered that apartment and shot her. So I think that's a reasonable amount. I think the largest one we've heard so far is the George Floyd case, and that one was $27 million. And part of that is the jury got a chance to see that 9.29-minute video, and I think that probably influenced those settlements there, and some of that is going back to the community. So I think that makes sense as well.
I mean, Philip, speaking of the Chauvin case, in the Chauvin case, a settlement just before the trial was believed to maybe have affected the jury in some way, shape, or form. Do you think that this settlement could affect the pending trial for the death of Elijah McClain?
Could it? Of course it could. But the good news is that at least the judgment is entered against different parties. I believe the judgment or the settlement is as against the municipality, and the entity itself is not the subject of the criminal charges. So during voir dire, during jury selection, all the prospective jurors will have to be drilled every which way to make sure that they can set aside anything that they may have heard about any civil litigation, you know, be it on the news, on television, in the tabloids, and be fair and impartial to the officers on trial.
And to your point, Philip, at least they know this well in advance. We don't have a scheduled date for those 5 first responders, but at least their defense attorneys will know this is something that's going to come up in voir dire. Thank you both. And an update on a story Law and Crime Daily first brought you last week. Joe Exotic has moved to a federal medical center in North Carolina amidst his battle with prostate cancer. Exotic, whose legal name is Joseph Maldonado Passage, will undergo treatment at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina. Exotic rose to fame in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic when the smash hit Tiger King was released on Netflix. The series documented Joe Exotic's passion for tigers and his feud with Carol Baskin, the animal rights activist who he claims killed her husband, Don Lewis. Lewis went missing in 1997 and was declared legally dead in 2002. In 2019, Joe Exotic was convicted on 17 counts of animal abuse relating to his care of exotic animals at the GW Zoo in Oklahoma. He was also convicted on 2 counts of attempted murder for hire stemming from a plot to kill Baskin. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for the crimes. But a 10th Circuit Court of Appeals found the trial wrongly treated those 2 convictions separately in calculating the prison term. In a statement this weekend, Exotic's attorney says he expects a speedy resentencing in the near future. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, an annual celebration turns deadly when an SUV plows into the Waukesha holiday parade in Wisconsin. Plus, we take you inside the courtroom for closing arguments in the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial. Our own Michel Bryant is live in Georgia with the takeaways from Monday's arguments. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. The jury hears closing arguments from both sides in the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial. Father and son Gregory and Travis McMichael and William Roddy Bryant face charges of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault in connection to the death of 25-year-old Arbery. In February 2020, Gregory and Travis McMichael tailed Arbery in a pickup truck as he went for a run near his home. He was unarmed at the time. Travis McMichael shot and killed him, claiming self-defense and citizen's arrest, a law that has since been repealed and replaced. Bryant captured a video of the shooting on his cell phone. On Monday, the prosecution presented his closing arguments, saying Travis McMichael intended to kill Arbery.
Deadly force is the last resort. Never point a gun at someone you do not intend to shoot. So when you start pointing a shotgun directly at somebody, what's your intention? The natural and necessary consequence of the act. You're going to kill this person. You're pointing it at him. The defendant's not going to be presumed to have acted with criminal intent, but you may find intention or the absence of intention upon consideration of their words, their conduct. What did they do out there? Their demeanor, their motive, and other circumstances. So when you look at each defendant separately, because that's what you're going to do, you're going to get 3 separate verdict forms. When you look at Mr. Bryant, what were his words? What was his conduct? What's his motive? What were the circumstances there for Mr. Bryant? What were they for Greg McMichael? What were they for Travis McMichael?
Travis McMichael's attorney countered the prosecution, saying he had a right to make a citizen's arrest and carry a weapon, arguing McMichael did not seek out violence.
He pulls out after his dad crammed into the front seat with the kid's seat there, and he follows, and he watches, and he pulls up next to this gentleman. No gun is raised. No violence is ensued. He doesn't get out of the car. He doesn't tackle him. He doesn't do anything. He does what a reasonably prudent person would do. He does what his training has taught him to do, to use leaps. And he says, hey, man, what's going on? Can you stop for a second? Please, I just want to talk to you for a second. There is no violence. If Travis wanted violence against this man, if Travis wanted to hurt him or commit an aggravated assault or commit a false imprisonment, he could have done it right then and there. He doesn't. He talks to him. Mr. Arbery looks him in the eyes, doesn't say a word, doesn't have to, but that's information for Travis. Is it so offensive to pull up next to somebody and say, hey man, can you stop for a second? I want to talk to you. Just for a minute. Hold on a second. Is that so offensive?
We turn now to Law and Crime Network's Michel Bryant live outside the Glenn County Courthouse in Brunswick, Georgia. Michael, what do you make of Monday's closing arguments?
Well, Brian, let me tell you, outside the courthouse, protests got louder and protesters got armed with assault rifles. Today, the new Black Panthers joined, or at least voices, not forces, with the Black Lives Matter folks and other demonstrators to shout out their support for Ahmaud Arbery. Again, they're all speaking with one voice, coming from very different perspectives. A lot of the things we hear are those that we've heard all along: no justice, no peace. There was a new one I heard today, though, that said, said, if we don't get justice, shut it down. Quote, shut it down. I asked a few folks, what exactly does that mean? Nobody seemed to know for sure. And then after one of the breaks, two of the defense attorneys met with some of these new Black Panthers. Just seemed like a little get-together, nothing big. But as they walked off, two of the new Black Panthers said, who are those guys? I'm not sure how effective the meeting was.
Interesting. Thank you, Michael. We're joined now by co-host Terry Austin and Los Angeles County Deputy Public Defender Philip Dubé. Terry, Laura Hogue, defense attorney for Greg McMichael, blamed a little bit of Ahmaud Arbery's death on him in her closing arguments and went as far as to speak about Ahmaud Arbery's, quote, dirty long toenails. Your thoughts on that closing?
Well, I was shocked when Laura Hogue blamed him for his own death. She started out saying he was a beautiful teenager with a wonderful smile, but he went astray. She said he was creeping in people's homes and that he was going in the wrong direction. He's not an innocent victim. He made the wrong choices. And frankly, she said he had no reason to be there. It wasn't his neighborhood. He can't be a looky-loo in another neighborhood. So it was very offensive. And basically, at the end of the day, what she ended up saying was he died because, for whatever reason, he chose to fight. Well, he chose to fight because he could no longer run. He tried to run for his life. And then what she said is that Travis McMichael basically had no option but to shoot and kill him. So I was shocked that she attacked Ahmaud Arbery.
Now, Philip, as a public defender, you're always looking at holes in a prosecution's closing. How do you think they did here?
Well, it's a hybrid. I think what they're going to have to contend with is the fact that Travis and the father had reasonable suspicion or a minimum curiosity and a hunch to detain Ahmaud. The question is going to become whether or not they had the right to use deadly force to effectuate an arrest. Did it go from being a lawful detention, allowing them to perfect an arrest and then use deadly force? I think that's going to be a problem for the defense. So yes, I think the prosecution scored big. Now, on the other hand, I think the defense is entitled to engage in a consensual encounter with Ahmaud to see if, in fact, he was up to no good or ask him what he's doing there. That's not illegal. The question becomes, though, whether it was an unlawful restraint on his liberty.
Absolutely. And Michael, what were the reactions in and around the court during closing arguments?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's very anxious about what's going to happen here, but they really want to just get these things done. And hopefully we will in the morning, and the jury will have the case by noon.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Michael, for that intrepid reporting there on the ground. When we come back, the deadly holiday parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin. What we know right now about the driver who plowed his vehicle into the crowded holiday parade. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. A Milwaukee man faces 5 counts of first-degree intentional homicide after he barreled an SUV into a holiday parade this weekend, killing 5 people and injuring more than 40 others. On Monday, Waukesha, Wisconsin police identified the suspect as Daryl Brooks. They say the 39-year-old was running from a domestic disturbance incident on Sunday when he crashed into the crowd. One officer began firing shots at the SUV, but had to stop because too many people were nearby. Brooks was taken into custody shortly after near the parade route. In a press conference on Monday, officials compared the scene to a war zone, saying dozens were injured, including 18 children.
Just carnage, likening it to a war zone. There were adults, children that were injured. Some of our first responders were there with our families. They left their families to treat people, helped with incident command, helped transport.
What I saw out of chaos and tragedy was heroes, first responders and the community coming together and working together on triaging victims, the fire department, working in partnership with the fire department, getting these victims to the hospital.
Philip, initial reports suggest that the driver was fleeing from a crime. I've even heard something about a stabbing. If that's true, does that affect any potential charges?
It will not give rise to felony murder in Wisconsin because the felony murder doctrine does not attach to evading or eluding police or assault unless it's sexual in nature. However, he can still, or they can be prosecuted for first or second degree murder and certainly reckless homicide, similar to what Kyle Rittenhouse faced based on an utter disregard for human life.
Going to be interesting to see how that plays out because, of course, that you're basically saying some murder charges, no, but others are on the table. Felony murder is usually the catch-all for homicide cases, so maybe it's a go big or go home for this type of prosecution. Terry, what was your reaction when you first saw the video of this deadly accident and death?
Well, you know, I was initially shocked when I heard about it, but when I saw the video, it was even more disturbing. It absolutely looked like a war zone. We know 5 people were killed, 40 were injured, and it's particularly disturbing knowing that there were so many children. They were just there trying to enjoy the Christmas parade. You never expect that something like that might happen when you are there with your family just trying to enjoy the holiday season. And frankly, there's no way to foresee this type of danger. It isn't even as though there was a weapon other than the vehicle involved. So anyone could be a victim to this type of crime. And thank goodness he is in custody now. And fortunately, no one else was injured while the police officers were trying to apprehend this individual. So thank you to the wonderful first responders who responded to the scene and helped all of those who were injured when they were there.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, especially when people are now able to get outside during the pandemic, that this happens. Well, thank you both, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.